Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the absolute bedrock of democratic politics, federalism. We'll be breaking down this concept in really simple English, starting from the big picture global definition, all the way down to how power is shared on the ground in a local Indian village. So if you've ever wondered exactly how power is distributed in a massive, incredibly diverse democracy, you are in the exact right place. Let's get right into it.
We've got a beautifully structured journey for you today. We'll quickly cover what federalism actually is, its 7 key features, how India operates as a federal country, linguistic and language policies, the evolving center-state relations, and we'll wrap up with decentralization and the Panchayati Raj.
Section 1. What is federalism? Let's tackle the core concept.
At its core, federalism is simply a system of government where power isn't just, hoarded at the very top. Instead, it's divided between a central authority, like your national government, and various constituent units, like provinces or states. The really crucial takeaway here is that both levels of government enjoy their power completely independent of the other. They each have their own sandbox to play in, so to speak. One usually handles matters of common national interest, while the provincial governments handle the day-to-day administration of their specific states.
To really get this, let's contrast a federal system with a unitary system. Under a unitary system, like what we see in Sri Lanka, the national government basically holds all the practical power. It can just dictate orders to provincial or local governments. Those local units are totally subordinate. But in a federal setup, like the one Belgium brilliantly adopted back in 1993, state or regional governments actually have their own independent constitutional powers. The central government literally cannot just order them around. They are separately answerable directly to the people.
Now that brings up a really fascinating question. We almost always think of federations as these massive, sprawling countries, right? Places like the US or Australia. So why on earth did a tiny country like Belgium adopt federalism? Well, it's because federalism isn't just about land size. It's an absolutely vital tool to manage cultural and regional diversity, ensuring fair power sharing no matter where the borders end. Moving on to Section 2, the 7 features of federalism. These are basically the rules of the game.
There are 7 universal rules that make a federal system actually work. First up, you need 2 or more levels or tiers of government. Second, each tier governs the exact same citizens, but has its own specific jurisdiction, its own legal authority when it comes to legislation, taxation, and administration. Third, this isn't just some casual gentleman's agreement. These jurisdictions are strictly, ironclad guaranteed by the Constitution. Fourth, one level of government absolutely cannot unilaterally change the fundamental provisions of the Constitution. It requires mutual consent. Fifth, if they ever butt heads, the highest court step in as an umpire to settle the dispute. Sixth, to ensure real financial autonomy, their exact sources of revenue are clearly laid out. And finally, number 7, which is really the heart of it all, federalism has a dual objective. It aims to safeguard the unity of the entire country while simultaneously accommodating regional diversity. An ideal federal setup requires both mutual trust and a solid agreement to live together.
All right, Section 3, India as a federal country. Let's look at power sharing in a vast nation. India is basically what we call a holding together federation, which means a large country deliberately decides to divide its power between its constituent states and the national government. The Indian Constitution strictly divides jurisdiction into a neat threefold distribution of legislative powers. First, we have the Union List. This covers massive subjects of national importance like defense, foreign affairs, and banking. Because we need a uniform policy for these across the entire country, only the Union government can make laws here. Second is the State List, dealing with local matters like police, agriculture, and trade. State governments have exclusive rights to make those laws. And third is the Concurrent List. This includes subjects of shared interest like education and marriage, where both levels of government can legislate. But here's the catch. If their laws ever conflict on this concurrent list, the Union government's law always prevails.
But wait, what about things that literally didn't exist when the Constitution was written? I'm talking about things like computer software. Well, these fall under residuary subjects, and the Union government gets the power to legislate on them. Now, it's also worth pointing out that because India is a holding together federation, not all states have identical powers. Some actually enjoy special status to protect the unique land rights and cultures of indigenous peoples. On the flip side, some areas are just too small to become independent states, but they can't be merged with existing ones either. Think of places like Chandigarh or the capital city, Delhi. These become union territories, and the central government gets special powers to run them.
Section 4. Linguistic and Language Policies. This is where the Federation was truly tested. When India began its democratic journey back in 1947, it had to figure out how to manage its truly incredible diversity. The solution? The boundaries of several old states were completely redrawn to create new ones based on language. The whole goal was to ensure that people who spoke the same language lived in the same state. Now, at the time, a lot of national leaders were terrified. They genuinely feared this would lead to the total disintegration of the country. But what actually happened? The creation of linguistic states made the country so much more united and made day-to-day administration significantly easier.
44%. That number represents the proportion of Indians whose mother tongue is Hindi, according to the 2011 census. Think about that. It's less than half the country.
And this brings us to a really critical question about language policy. Because no single language is spoken by a majority as their mother tongue, the Indian Constitution actually did not give the status of national language to any one language. Hindi was identified as the official language, sure, but to protect that incredible linguistic diversity, the Constitution legally recognized 21 other scheduled languages. Plus, to avoid the kind of violent, chaotic conflicts we've seen in unitary systems like Sri Lanka, Indian leaders cautiously allowed the continued use of English for official purposes right alongside Hindi. That flexibility was an absolute game changer for holding the federation together.
Section 5. Changing center-state relations. Let's talk about the big political shift.
Over the years, there's been a dramatic, historical shift in how the center and the states interact. Before the 1990s, the exact same political party often ruled both at the center and in most of the states. During that era, the central government would frequently misuse the Constitution to just dismiss state governments controlled by rival parties, which obviously completely undermined the entire spirit of federalism. But the post-1990s era, that saw a massive shift. We witnessed a huge rise in regional political parties, ushering in an entirely new culture of respect for state autonomy. This shift was also backed up by some major Supreme Court rulings that made it incredibly difficult for the central government to just arbitrarily dismiss state governments.
A major driver of this post-1990s shift was the rise of the coalition government. Suddenly, no single party had a clear majority in the national parliament. So, major national parties had to enter into alliances with a bunch of other parties, including regional ones, just to form a government. This forced collaboration was huge. It made federal power sharing much more effective, much more robust in practice than it ever was in the early years of the Republic.
Finally, Section 6. Decentralization and Panchayati Raj. Taking power straight to the grassroots.
I absolutely love this fun analogy from the textbook. We are like a three-tier coach in a train. I always prefer the lower berth. It perfectly captures the staggering reality of India's size. States in India are literally as large as independent European countries. Uttar Pradesh alone is bigger than Russia in terms of population. Because these states are so massive and internally diverse, a standard two-tier system just wasn't cutting it. India desperately needed a third tier of government right below the state level.
And that brings us to decentralization. The basic idea here is incredibly simple yet profound. There are just a massive number of problems and issues that are best settled at the local level. People have way better knowledge of the problems in their own specific localities, and they know exactly where to spend money efficiently. In 1992, a major constitutional amendment took this idea and turned it into a powerful reality by legally reinforcing local self-governments.
This 1992 amendment introduced some seriously bold, constitutionally mandatory steps. It required regular elections for local bodies, it mandated seat reservations for marginalized groups, and, absolutely critically, at least one-third of all positions were explicitly reserved for women. It also established independent state election commissions to ensure these elections were run fairly and legally required state governments to share power and revenue with these local bodies. These steps instantly deepened democracy, creating literally the largest experiment in local government conducted anywhere in the world.
In rural areas, this local government system is known as the Panchayati Raj, and it scales up in a really logical way. Step 1 is the Gram Panchayat. That's a village-level decision-making council headed by a sarpanch. Step 2 groups a few of these village councils together to form what's called a Panchayat Samiti, or block. And then Step 3 groups all those samitis in a district together to form the Zilla Parshad, operating at the highest district level. But it definitely doesn't stop at the villages. Urban local government follows a very similar, structured path. Municipalities are set up in towns, and these massive municipal corporations are established in big cities, controlled by elected representatives and headed up by mayors. So whether you're in a tiny rural village or a sprawling urban metropolis, this system allows citizens to directly participate in decision-making and actually manage their own local affairs.
Today, there are about 36 lakh, that's 3.6 million elected representatives in panchayats and municipalities all over the country. Think about that for a second. That number is bigger than the entire population of many countries. But as we wrap up this explainer, we really need to look forward. While we've clearly made massive strides, real challenges definitely remain. Many state governments still hesitate to transfer significant powers and adequate financial resources down to these local bodies. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. With millions of elected representatives ready to lead, how can we overcome these remaining hurdles to truly realize the ultimate ideal of self-government? The rules of federalism are always evolving, pushing us to ask how we can make power sharing even more effective in our very own communities. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the mechanics of democracy.